good, y'all? So in this video, I'm going to be reacting to Mr. Ballen's 3 strange but true horrifying moments. I've already done the first 3. This is my last video. So we're at number 1. We're at the I'm guessing the most strange story of them all, you know? The first one was just like tragic, but like shocking. Second one was tragic, but like sinister. So I'm wondering what this one's about to be about, you know? But anyways, let's get into it.
Farm in New Hampshire, and then later in his life, he had worked in a mine blasting through rock. And so in addition to just being the ideal railroad worker for this time in America, when Phineas actually started working in New York on this railroad, his co-workers immediately started looking up to him. Phineas was extremely smart and energetic. He was this incredible conversationalist. He was charismatic and funny and a natural leader.
Already. I'm in psychology, and we've gone over the characteristics of psychopath, sociopath, all of that. He's giving me Jeffrey Dahmer. Maybe not, though. I don't know.
And so, just 2 months into starting this new job, it was no surprise to anyone who knew Phineas or worked with Phineas that he was promoted to blasting foreman, which meant Phineas would lead the explosives team. Phineas was so excited about this promotion that he went to a blacksmith and had a custom tamping iron made. A tamping iron is a long metal rod that's used to pack explosives. When railroad workers wanted to blast through, let's say, a big rock, they would start by drilling a deep but skinny hole in the rock. Then they would pour blasting powder inside. Then they'd put a fuse inside. And then using this tamping iron, they would push the blasting powder and the fuse deep into this hole inside of this rock or whatever it was they were blowing up. And then once it was packed, they would ignite it. Usually, tamping irons were sort of rough tools that looked like crowbars, but Phineas really wanted something special to commemorate this promotion. And so Phineas had the...
I hope y'all can't hear the shower in the background. Somebody's taking a shower.
The blacksmith make this perfectly straight, smooth, 4-foot-long metal tamping iron, and on one end was a pointed side, and on the other was a blunted side. And this rod, it weighed about 13 pounds, and it was about 1.25 inches in diameter. And Phineas loved this tamping iron. He brought it with him not just to work, but basically anywhere he went. On September 3rd, 1848, so not long after Phineas's big promotion, Phineas and his explosives team were blasting through some rock that ran through a forest. And Phineas, he was right up front over the blasting site, helping them prep the explosive. His team had drilled that long, deep, skinny hole into the rock they were about to blow up, and then blasting powder was put inside. A fuse was packing the powder and fuse deep into the rock. And the way he did this is he used the blunt end of his tamping iron to pack the explosives, which meant the pointed end was sticking out of the rock. And so as Phineas is doing this, someone behind him slipped on a rock. One of his men tripped or something. Jesus. And so Phineas, with his hands kind of on his tamping iron, turned to the right to look and see what was going on. And when he did this, somehow his tamping iron that was inside of this skinny hole must have nudged against the inside of the rock, created a spark, and ignited the explosive inside of the rock.
Oh, that's not going where I thought it was going. I thought he was going to say that that somebody tripped, and this is the tamping iron on the you feel me? That's what I thought. I'm not.
Which meant the tamping iron was basically fired like a missile out of this hole into Phineas's head. It went in his cheek, up behind his left eye, up and out of his skull, and then shot 80 feet away, landing on the ground, covered in Phineas's blood and brains. This happened so quickly that for a second, after this thing has blown through Phineas's head, Phineas just stood there upright with his eyes wide, and then suddenly a geyser of blood began shooting out of the top of his head, and then Phineas fell backwards onto the ground. When Phineas's body hit the ground, he began having a seizure, at which point his co-workers, who were still kind of shaken up from this sudden blast, they rushed over and tried to kind of position him in a way that he wouldn't hurt himself. But I mean, they're looking at him and he's literally missing half of his head. He's covered in blood. And they're thinking, you know, there's nothing we can do for him but basically wait for him to die. And so all of Phineas's co-workers, who adored Phineas, just stood there very somber watching their boss die. But eventually, Phineas stopped having a seizure, and then he opened his eyes and he looked up at his crew and he sat up and he said, "What happened?" Now remember,
My brother had a seizure and he didn't know. So I know that people that have seizures aren't aware that they're having a seizure. Like the traumatizing thing that you might be seeing is they don't have any like memory, or at least from the people I know that have seizures.
Half of his head has been blown out by a 13-pound, 4-foot-long metal rod that has shot through his head. And his coworkers, when they heard how clearly he was speaking and how focused his eyes were, I mean, they couldn't believe it. How in the world is this guy alive, let alone having a coherent conversation with them? And so the coworkers told Phineas, please lie down, we'll get you help, lie down, relax. But Phineas, who still had blood also shooting out of his head, just kind of stood up casually and walked over to the railroad cart and signaled for his crew to take him back into town. And so the crew, they're looking over at Phineas, who now is literally head to toe just red from blood. Still bleeding, but less so, and he's just sitting on the railroad cart waiting for them. And so they walk over to him and they start the slow 1-mile journey into town on this railroad cart. And the whole time they're all kind of looking at Phineas, expecting him to die any second. But instead, Phineas is just kind of looking around with half of his head. And at some point he pulled out his logbook and carefully wrote down what time they were leaving their work site to make sure his crew was accurately paid. And then finally they reached town, and Phineas was still very much alive and looking around, acting like nothing had happened to him. And the co-workers helped him to his hotel, and Phineas just sat outside on a chair in front of his hotel, just people watching, while his crew went and got a doctor. A doctor soon arrived, and he too was completely shocked at Phineas's appearance, but even more so was Phineas's eyes. He looked at the doctor, and his eyes were totally focused, like he was all there, totally lucid, looking at the doctor, waiting for him to come over and help him out with his little injury. And when the doctor kind of timidly approached Phineas, Phineas very famously said as he sat on his chair, "Doctor, here's business enough for you." Like everyone else, the doctor fully assumed that despite Phineas's miraculous recovery from this injury, that he would soon die from this horrific wound in his head. And so the doctor moved Phineas up into the hotel, put him in a bed, and then basically made him comfortable. Now, the doctor at this point was not trying to save Phineas. He felt like there was nothing he could do to save Phineas. At this point, it was like mercy. Let's make this as pain-free as possible for Phineas as he inevitably dies from this injury. But Phineas didn't die. He would break out of it and basically be okay again. However, his personality at first, after he came out of this state of delirium, was not really the same. No longer was he this funny, smart, charming, confident leader. Instead, he was this guy who seemed to have lost all of his inhibitions and was kind of childlike. He swore all the time. He would tell people he had these crazy plans he was going to go do, but he would never follow through with them. And he would tell his nieces and nephews these wild stories about himself that were obviously made up and not even close to reality. But overall, he was okay, even though you could see his brain pulsing underneath his skin on the side of his head that had been blown off. And within a couple of years of this injury, those changes to Phineas's personality kind of faded, and he really did become old Phineas. However, there was one unique quirk to Phineas post-injury that never went away. And that was Phineas's kind of unhealthy love for the tamping iron that had blown through his head. After his injury, Phineas kind of stopped making friends, and any friends he did have, he really didn't try to keep those relationships up. He didn't get married, he didn't have kids. Instead, the tamping iron became sort of like his best friend. He took it everywhere with him, even posing at one point with the tamping iron the way you would expect a couple to pose for a photo. 12 years after his horrific injury, Phineas would develop seizures, likely from the injury, and then he would die with his beloved tamping rod right by his side. His case changed neuroscience forever by showing that an injury to the brain could affect specific personality traits. Today, Phineas's skull and his tamping rod are on display at Harvard Medical School.
Damn, why did they put it like that? Dude, that's not how it was.
So that's going to do it. If you enjoyed today's story,
I think the last one wasn't as shocking to me because I knew the whole thing with the brain injuries and everything, because my brother had a stroke, which is why he had a seizure, or two seizures, couple seizures. And so for me, I think that was more, I feel like the story was like, wow, but I feel like the knowledge and stuff I kind of already knew. And I think it was some 13 Reasons Why, where like the kid tried to kill himself, so he shot himself in the brain and he just missed. I guess you have to hit a certain point, but he just hit like a different point in his head and he just ended up losing his memory. Like, the brain is really like complex and intriguing, and it's just very interesting. But I know that you can have like brain injuries and it can change your personality and everything like that. But yeah, this was crazy. I liked all of these stories. When I was going to record this one this morning, I saw that he had a new video with like a clown or something. I might react to that tomorrow. Don't know yet. But anyways, y'all like, comment, subscribe, follow me on Instagram, follow me on Twitter. I'll see y'all on the next one.